Well, the Eurovision Song Contest has been mentioned, but I think we all know that it was won by an East European, a Ukrainian, for a song telling the story of the deportation of Crimean Tatars. And may that be a reminder to us that the perpetual peace that we now take for granted in Europe is actually something very fragile. That we now again have a revisionist power which has just grabbed a neighbor's province on the pretext of protecting a national minority that wasn't persecuted. So I believe that the strategic and security dimension of this is very important. The British are having a good debate, and I so wish at Wembley Stadium, Boris Johnson and George Osborne. I mean, how I'd like to be there and to hear that, because those are both skilled Oxford Union debaters. But the debate has at last fleshed out the arguments in Britain, which needed to be done, because I watched a number of British politicians coming to Brussels as Eurosceptics, then learning how the EU actually works, and some of them now support the stay in campaign. Well, what does that tell you? That they only learned about the EU only on the job, that before the debate was not preparing them with the facts. Now, the ambassador spoke about migration being an important issue, and it is. Full disclosure, as a Pole, we are, I think, the largest number of migrants from the EU as a result of a friendly British decision by Tony Blair to not use the possible 7-year transition period. So when you hear about migration from the EU being a possible cause for Britain leaving, it's us Poles, to blame. But let me just explain to you very briefly where we as Poles, now talking about the country, come at this. For us, joining the European Union was a liberation from our geopolitics. Our geopolitics are that we are on a flat plane, that NATO planners used to describe Poland as having been made by God for tank warfare, between two more powerful neighbors. And for us, becoming a member of NATO, becoming a member of the EU, meant becoming a border country of a larger whole rather than a buffer state between two much more powerful states. And the geopolitical argument, I think, applies to Britain too, but of course in a very different way. I got enough of a British education to know that for the last 500 years, the British have fought several wars, including wars that were not called world wars at the time, but the War of Spanish Succession and several other wars that were basically about preventing any one country or dynasty in those days from controlling the continent to the exclusion of Britain. And certainly, the First World War and the Second World War were about that, to the Cold War to some extent too. And now the thought that the British would voluntarily do what for so long they were preventing others from achieving, to me is a strategic surprise. It would not benefit the United Kingdom strategically. The British in their Scottish referendum campaign had the slogan, stronger together. I think the same argument applies to the European Union. We are stronger together. And may the best argument for that is, well, who is for Brexit? Who is for disintegration, disaggregation of the European Union? That well-known friend of European values and of Europe as a whole, President of Russia, Vladimir Putin. The President of the United States, on the other hand, is appealing for the British to stay in. Pick your choice. Who do you trust more to be a friend of the British people, of liberal values, and of the West as we've known it? To me, it seems clear. The unification of continent to the exclusion of Britain would, I think, be detrimental to your interest. But equally, you should take into account the possibility that your leaving would create the psychology of a bank run. Ambassador, you said the EU will continue for the rest of our lives. I so hope you're right. Inshallah, as they say. But you can't exclude the possibility that once you've left, there will be populist victories in some other countries, and that we will have more of these referenda. And we don't know where it might lead, and a fragmentation of the continent into its constituent parts or groups of countries would not be beneficial to Britain or to Europe either. The Ulster issue has already been dealt with. I'm told that in Ulster is actually 70% for staying, which means that if Britain left, the legitimacy of the order in Ulster would be questioned. The proportion of Catholics have risen. The Good Friday Agreement is based on there being no border between Ulster and the Republic. And if you left, the border, at least for commercial purposes, for customs purposes, would have to be re-established. Some people might then say in Ulster, that's not what the deal was. We demand a referendum of our own. And unlike Scotland, there are lawyers here who can correct me, but Scotland would have to apply. Ulster could just rejoin. So that might be an additional temptation for and a danger to the unity of the United Kingdom. The ambassador has already said about how useful the EU is for issues of internal security. And I watched with fascination the change of views by a well-known, powerful British politician, Theresa May, the Home Secretary, who I think came to government as a Eurosceptic. Now that she's seen how it actually works, that you can automatically send people for trial, or you can send people to serve the rest of their sentences in their home country, she's now campaigning to stay in. I understand that if Britain left, you would no longer be in the European arrest warrant system, and it would be back to the previous system of extraditions, which are, of course, very lengthy and very expensive. I'm also told that there is a certain frisson among the Polish, at least, criminal classes in Britain. Guess what? They would prefer to serve out the rest of their sentences in British prisons rather than being sent to Poland, and you can calculate the cost of that. Carl and I attended in Brussels an innumerable number of foreign affairs councils. And they are sometimes interesting, sometimes not. But I want to just convey to you the importance of the fact that these foreign ministers from the member states meet on average once a month, and they become colleagues. It's not just that the British and the Irish foreign secretary or the British and the Spanish foreign secretary become colleagues and particular issues to do with Ireland or Gibraltar or others are discussed. It's the fact that by becoming colleagues, we cannot conceive of ourselves becoming enemies. I could not imagine people that I've worked with as people that I would go to war with. The barriers of knowledge and of trust have been overcome. And if for nothing else, Europe is a very useful framework for that. And then, of course, there is external security. President Obama's interviews, but in particular his policies, show that the United States has global responsibilities, has to reassure Japan, allies in Asia, and is telling us that we need to secure our own neighborhood on our own, that we cannot, in every contingency, count on the United States on saving us from our own troubles. And it means that as Europe, we should be able to back up our diplomacy once in a while with force if need be. We should be able to secure the perimeter and thereby lessen European people's fears about migration. Because those are real fears. With political consequences. For example, in Poland, we have a government which won with 38% of the vote, won the majority of 6, and 2 or 3% of those 38% were gained by the fear of migration that had not yet materialized. Not a single migrant has arrived in Poland, but it's already had a political effect. My argument would be the following, that the Eurozone and the Schengen zone are confederal arrangements, namely that groups of states establish a system and establish rules, but the enforcement of those rules is up to the member states. And it only takes one member state to breach the rules to bring the whole system down. And we have a crisis of confederal arrangements. And by the way, it's the same member state in both cases. But we also have a problem in that going to union centralized enforcement is, for political reasons, impossible. And so we just have to do a much better job at peer review, at helping member states to cope, to restore confidence in the system. In conclusion, I would say that, and this is perhaps a dangerous argument to make because this is what the leavers suspect the continent of wanting to do. But my view of the European Union is the view of a British Prime Minister, namely that it should be a superpower but not a superstate. For it to become a superpower, it needs to do more together in those areas where we each and all of us together do better together, and less in those areas where nation states could set their own policies. We also need a greater legitimacy of the whole system. And as foreign ministers, we had a reflection group, and we proposed that some proportion, a quarter of the members of the European Parliament should be elected from a pan-European list, and that the President of the European Commission should be directly elected by the peoples of Europe. It would bring legitimacy to the union level, democratic accountability, and politics properly understood. And it would also create a body of men and women who would be entitled and could effectively speak on behalf of Europe. Because I think the problem has been, and that's the reason why we have this referendum and why its outcome is so uncertain, is that for too long, all over Europe, we as politicians have been making arguments to win votes on nationalist grounds, hoping that the EU legitimacy and EU opinion about the EU will take care of itself. Well, guess what? It is not taking care of itself anymore. We need more leadership, and I will conclude with this. I believe that the British government needs a plan B, whatever the outcome of the referendum. Of course, they need to concentrate on winning, but if they do, Britain's standing in the Union and Britain's leadership in the Union should be restored. And I believe Britain should pick an area of integration where it has some unique advantages, I believe it's foreign and defense policy, and then bring British influence and leadership to bear on that area. Thank you very much.